You've got it tuned into the Zelos podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder, and this is the show that's all about the pros behind the pros. And this week's no different. Michael Mullin is with me this week. He is a presenter and educator. Aside from Perform Better, he travels all over the world working with professional sports teams and a whole bunch more. But before we get underway, check out my website, rockysnyder.com, for continuing education if you need some credits there. Plus, there's podcast archives, and heck, you can even check out the new wedge kits, foot wedges. If you want information about it, just go to performbetter.com. And while you're there, check out their 3-day functional summit. They're coming up in Long Beach, California, Chicago, Illinois, and Providence, Rhode Island. That's going to be in June, July, and August, not in that order. But also check out Satanta College if you're interested in furthering your education in the world of strength and conditioning. They've got master's and bachelor's degrees. Just add RS10 when you sign up for your program and get 10% off tuition. Also check out the NSCA National Conference coming up this July 16th and 19th in Kansas City, Missouri. I'll be there and I hope to see you there too. Meanwhile, follow me on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder and enjoy the show. Well, Michael, it's been a year since we were sitting in the lobby of a hotel in Los Angeles, I think it was. Yes, at the Perform Better Training Summit, and it's just amazing how time flies by. And of course, we're on opposite coasts with time zones that kind of get in the way. But I'm so glad you were able to put a little time aside. So, first of all, welcome to the Zealous podcast.
Thank you, my friend. Great to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, it's my treat, and I get an entire close to an hour asking you to improve my knowledge base with what you have. So I'm giddy as can be. But first, how about this? If you don't mind, tell the listening audience what your career path has been, or and where you are now, and how you got there, if you don't mind.
Of course. No, absolutely. So I'll start here. I own a practice called Integrative Rehab Training. I actually have a studio above my garage at my house in Cumberland Center, Maine, which I'm just tickled with. Been here for about 5 years. I've been out on my own with my practice for about 8 years now. I started about 35 years ago, graduating college with an athletic training degree. So sports medicine background. I really liked the rehab side of my education. And so I got my first job working in a physical therapy environment, working with other PTs and helping to do the physical therapy for varying types of people. I also ran a walk-in injury clinic for 4 local high schools in Manchester, New Hampshire, where there was an injury clinic that could come in, I'd assess and give them guidance and some things to work on, and was there for about 5 years, and then was able to have a position running the rehab department for a pretty prominent surgeon's practice in San Francisco. And so as the coordinator of rehab for his practice, he was doing a lot of cutting edge procedures back in the mid 90s of, meniscal transplants and articular cartilage procedures and stuff that, I really had to kind of educate myself on because nobody else is doing these things. So developing post-operative protocols, and it was at that point that I started doing more work with, I did some work with, Pro Ski Tour, US Ski Team, windsurfing, more diverse sports than the classic sports.
Sure.
Which was great. We were able to kind of, once you know biomechanics, it's just applying it to a little bit of a different model, which was really a great experience. We had a great time out there for about 5-6 years, and then we wanted to kind of move back to the East Coast, so we moved back to Maine back in 2000. And then I worked continued in outpatient physical therapy. And again, as I mentioned, I went on my own about 8 years ago, and over the last 25 years or so, I've really done a lot of work with consulting with pro teams and consulting with other professionals and organizations. I lecture a fair amount all over the place on a host of different topics. I like to do educational stuff on a small basis here. I'll bring PTs and other rehab professionals in for one-on-one or 2-on-1 educational programs out of my studio, and then I spend my day seeing clients, and it's anything from really active people who've injured themselves and haven't responded to traditional models of physical therapy and rehab, to people who've had like chronic pain. Or people who have really complex things and want a little bit of a different approach, which is a lot of what I do.
That's cool. And I know you've worked with like Kevin Neal down with the Boston Bruins, hung out with those guys for a little while. You've done some work with the Atlanta Hawks, of course, Arizona Coyotes before they became the Utah Hockey Club, and a whole assortment of other teams, as well as international too. I know you've been over to the Mediterranean and taught there, as well as some other places. So your work takes you far and wide, and yet you find a way to stay centered at home, which is a nice bouquet, I guess you'd say.
I feel very fortunate. Thank you. Yeah, it's been the opportunities that I've been afforded are, I feel very fortunate, and don't take any of them lightly. Throughout my year, I mean, I'm in a continuing education nut. I mean, the amount of money of our retirement money, as I look back at it now, that I've spent
Right?
on
Crazy.
continuing education, it has brought me to just a multitude of different methodologies and approaches. I mean, I hear about something, I want to learn more about it, so I kind of dive in and take the coursework and read books, educate myself every day. And so my diverse background with a number of different approaches has afforded me a different way of looking at the body, which is kind of like my own blend, if you would, of things that I've learned over the years and through a ton of observations and working with a lot of people. So
Well, that's the natural order of things, don't you think? I mean, not that we're trying to collect an alphabet after our name in regards to the letters and certifications. It's more like just a pursuit of more insight and more knowledge and more so that you can be more effective. So I would love to get what your box of chocolate looks like when we talk about the different flavors of knowledge and approaches. But before that, I'm curious, why athletic training? What was it that got you in school to say, you know what, I want to be an athletic trainer? Was there something that happened while you were in sports, or it was just something that piqued your interest?
that's a great question. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I would not work well behind a desk or any
Mm.
place that would keep me stationary. So when I got accepted to college and was literally just before I was going to college, my mom had found this article in a newspaper. It's like, you know what, this kind of sounds kind of interesting. You might want to look into this. And so they happened to have a program at the school that I was going to, and again, I grew up playing, sports and just being really active my whole life. Soccer and lacrosse were my main sports, in terms of like team sports, but I've just always been really active. And so, yeah, so I studied that in college, and it was really drawn to um, a lot of different things, but in particular, you had to kind of think on your feet. You had to constantly be updated in terms of all the new information that was available. You had to be able to kind of make snap decisions. You had to really be, thought process and interactive when you're working with people in terms of like, how to discuss injuries and problems, how to coordinate care with other health professionals. So it was really all the things that kind of spoke to me as an individual. And that's worked very well for me as I've carried that on through my career. And even in working in outpatient PT and again in that surgeon's practice, I had to be kind of the middleman, if you would, and constantly interacting with, massage therapists or an orthopedic surgeon or a parent or a child or, whoever it would be, the coach of the team. And so that's been a great way for me to kind of hone my skills and be able to speak, frankly, different languages. You got to speak the medical language and the fancy stuff, and then you got to be able to kind of consolidate it and put it into words that kind of make sense for people and really kind of, bring it down to a more simplistic language that they can understand better.
Yeah,
So
I
thank you,
don't
Mom.
know.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, honestly, I love how those little serendipitous things. For myself, I was out of work in the early '90s. Honestly, I was a line cook in a local restaurant here on the coast, central coast of California, and they changed ownerships, and I found myself without work, and my roommate at the time was looking through the classifieds. For the younger listening audience, this is occurring in what was called a newspaper, and they would have job listings, and there was one that spoke about a health club, like working in a health club. He was like, dude, you work out all the time. You should consider that. And it just so happened that, all those little serendipitous things put you and myself here together at this moment, which I always love. But how about this, Michael? Your first pursuit outside of the world of academia, the outside of college, something that sparked your interest, that began this journey, this pursuit from one organization of learning to another? Was there one that you just was like, okay, this is great. This is great information. Now I'm even more hungry, and I've got to seek even more information out.
Um, I can't think of one. Well, I can think of one. Yes. So yeah, if I go way back,
Yeah, go for it.
um, I do a lot of hands-on work. I feel very fortunate to have a pretty good sense with what I do with my body and other people's bodies, and being able to sense and feel things. And very, very early on in my first job, I remember working with a therapist who was very gifted manual therapist, if you would. And I would just kind of watch how she worked, and some of the things she would accomplish, and watch how range of motion and mobility and pain would increase, and pain would be reduced just with some really thoughtful care through the work that she was doing. And so I took a course in manual therapy early on, and again watched the instructor very knowledgeably be able to kind of very quickly identify limitations and restrictions while just kind of touching somebody pretty quickly. And I'm like, this seems like this speaks to me. This is something that I really want to kind of delve in further. And so I started really spending more time doing more hands-on work. And that allowed me not only to do better care when I was working with people in terms of better outcomes, but it also helped my assessment skills, because you're really able to understand and feel and manipulate structures better to be able to identify where the problem might actually be. And it gets, I feel fortunate to be at a point now where I teach that a lot to other people as my own blend of the different things that I've learned, as well as things that I've just learned through working with people. Dancing with them is literally how I phrase it with people, because it's not my hands, it's my body interacting with theirs as I transfer forces through the system onto somebody else to be able to help create effective change. So I hadn't really brought it back that far. So thank you for bringing that to my attention, Rocky.
No, no problem. I'm glad you bring that up too, in regards to the hands-on stuff, because historically, as as coaches, strength coaches, personal trainers, it has been frowned upon, and it has been suggested that that's outside your scope of practice, that it's supposed to be a hands-off. But I would love for your position, your thoughts on that.
Well, that's a tricky one. So the
It
way
is.
I'll answer that is this: is I feel that unless it's explicitly written otherwise, that once you've developed a rapport and a relationship with a client, and you've got this trusting interaction, that you helping to do something to guide someone, or they've got an ankle that's a little stiff and you want to kind of go in and just kind of move it around a little bit to help them stretch out. Here I am with my air quotes. Um,
Yes.
Help to kind of guide structures into positions. As long as it's not explicitly not written, then I feel actually I feel pretty strongly that we get too hung up on what some of the licenses and certifications are that are necessary to be able to do work. I know we need to put guidelines in place. I'm not ignorant of that, but I also feel that there are some very gifted people who don't want to go through the whole whatever massage therapy licensing program, or go back to PT school or stuff like that in order to put their hands on people. And so that's kind of like my view. I know I've walked a line my whole professional career with not working outside my scope of practice, if you would, but I've always walked this line of like doing stuff that I'm sure if other professionals would be like, well, where'd you get your training for that? Are you okay to do that? And I'm like, I am, and I can. You know what I mean? So it's like there's this,
Yes.
I walk the gray area not to be anything other than respectful for the clients that I work with, because I want what's best for them. And I feel in those situations, it's what I feel is best for them in that given scenario.
Beautifully said. That's excellent, and I appreciate that, because it's exactly where I'm feeling too. So you explore some manual work, and then where does your interest go from that point on? Because I know you delved heavily into PRI and the coursework and spoke at a PRI event and so on. And so at some point in time, it started to kind of your attention drew to the breath, but I imagine there was things in between that. Were
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, again, as I mentioned, since very early in my career, I was constantly reading and still do,
Hmm.
and taking a lot of basically orthopedic-based continuing education programs, whatever stuff related to the shoulder, stuff related to the knee, stuff related to rehab, particular body parts, high level return to athletic sport evaluations for for when people's return to readiness, things like that. But I always would have questions. I always have questions. There'd be things that I would see, sense, questions that would be asked of me, things I'd feel that I wouldn't have answers for. And so I just continued to seek. And the more that I would take coursework, the more answers would be afforded to me, some more than others. Some that I'd leave with, and I'm kind of like, well, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure I agree with that methodology and the way they do things. Not that it's wrong, but it gave me an opportunity to then become more of a critical thinker. When I took a course in 2000 from posture restoration, it was the first time I took a course that I'm like, oh, okay, they're answering some questions for some stuff that I've been having, difficulty finding guidance on. A lot of it evolved around kind of when it came to the breath and understanding the, how valuable of a tool and a misunderstood aspect of human function that is. I mean, it's a modality that I use with every single client that I work with for a reason. It creates shape change. It allows for performance enhancement. It allows for recovery. It allows for sleep. I mean, it's all the gamut. And so, this most powerful voluntary yet involuntary thing that we all have access to wasn't being discussed and talked about. And so, learning more about the way that the Institute assessed it and created some intervention strategies to work on better balancing of that mechanism, along with some of the other stuff that they would talk about was, my first foray into understanding that better, which was powerfully helpful and shifting my thought processes and understanding of the human body. And
Very
then from
cool.
there, it was kind of like, you know, the realm of other things, through, FMS and SFMA stuff. And I spent a lot of time with Bill Hartman over the years and, other methodologies that Mulligan, drawing blanks and all the acronyms. I can go through all the acronyms, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Most recently AIA, some of the Applied Integration Academy work that they're doing. So there's a lot of really great stuff out there that are kind of building off each other, if you would. And so again, as I mentioned, my approach is kind of like an integrative, obviously the name, way to meld those models for the individual that I see. And sometimes it's going to be a little bit more biased towards, let's say, one of those methodologies, and sometimes it's going to be a little bit more of a blend of something else. Sometimes it's just good coaching. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's nothing fancy. It's your work. That's your wheelhouse, right? Good coaching can get a lot of really great things done.
Hmm. Yeah, I can hear that. So when somebody comes in to your private practice, you've got I won't say a typical approach. There's got to be somehow you're gathering information on them, and then out of all the wide variety of modalities you can draw from, how is it you narrow down to what it is that the person needs?
Um, so therein lies the rub, so
Yes.
that's where the art and the science kind of hit the ground together. That's where um, the what you've gleaned from their history taking, what I've captured from their comfort level with interacting with me, frankly, not because I'm overbearing, but more like how comfortable are they kind of like delving into, deeper understandings of the body, or am I going to need to be a little bit more superficial here, which is not a judgment. It's just a reality. What are they going to be able to take that's going to allow them to feel like they're going to be successful leaving here? So that's where the element of what I do kind of comes into the art and the experience piece. Um, pretty much everybody will get something as it relates to manipulating their breath. Because for me, when I'm seeing people, it's about having them understand how to change their body's ability and perceptions of navigating the ground, navigating the way that we load the body, navigating the way that they've positioned themselves over time and throughout life because of injuries and habits and routines and jobs, for example, in sports, and using that internal dynamic to shift their body into a new position and create a new sense for them, that when they go through a couple of activities and they get up and they walk around, they're kind of like, oh my gosh, yeah, that feels different. It feels whatever that descriptor is. And though from there, it allows me to then reassess on the table to make sure the activities were successful, but also they're then sensing the change in their body pretty quickly, which allows them to feel like, oh, wow, I should actually probably keep on top of this stuff because this feels like this is in the direction of a change that I'm trying to create. It was a long answer, but I hope I
Certainly.
kind of hit it.
No, no. Yeah. And there is a rub to that in the regard to that it is, although you're assessing and reassessing and finding out, the ability to quantify it is not as readily available often as it is to it's more qualitative information than it is quantitative information compared to, say, the pharmaceutical industry or other approaches where there's measured results and outcomes more easily. You know what I'm getting at? It's like I would love, because I like to read too, and what I'm coming up to is a lot of the research journals that I'm interested in are aren't very prevalent because the work that we typically do when working with people with chronic or acute issues is individualistic, and it depends on their level of integration. I won't say they're unintegrated. I won't say
Yep.
they're dysfunctional. Do you know what I'm getting at here?
I think I do. So, number one, big bold statement that I'll say is that, I mean, I read research pretty much every single day, but research is really dirty, just to be perfectly clear. As soon as
Mm,
you want to study something, it becomes flawed. I know that sounds like, what are you saying? I don't believe in science? Of course I believe in science. But as soon as you want
no.
to study something, you have to then put constraints on it. So now
Yeah.
it being representative of what you really think it means is let's just say flawed, some just more than others. And that's okay. So that's kind of concept number one from a measuring
Hmm.
perspective. Number two, my inner tester reliability is really quite good. I've been doing this a long time. You know what I mean? I'm sorry, my apologies. Is really quite good. I've been doing this a long time. I've been measuring things and I write stuff down from a standpoint of creating, let's just call them dirty measures, objective measures of, this cervical movement, this thoracic movement, this scapular movement, this, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it gives me something that I can work from, a blueprint, if you would, chessboard, if you would. And then from there, I'm able to then say, okay, if I create an intervention and I go back to remeasure it, which is what I do, did that change? Did it create the change in enough of the areas that I want as I try to prioritize based upon that outline to be able to then say, this is an appropriate activity for them? So there are some things, as I mentioned, from the subjective aspect of what they feel when they get up, but there's definitely some objective measures that I use that do help to guide my treatments that, again, have been refined over the years. And that's one of the tricky things too, as you recognize, we can say, let's just say in the fitness world, oh, when you squat, if you put your heels up on ramps, it's better. You're able to squat deeper because it's ankle dorsiflexion limitation. That's what it says. Actually, no, that's just one thing that it tells you. Just like every other measure on my table, it says, oh, well, that's limited rotation this way, so that means this. No, that's one thing it tells you. It can mean other things depending upon the lens that you want to look at things through. And so from that perspective, as I mentioned, there's things that research and studies and science can tell us, but it's up to you as a professional to then take that information and put it into your box, if you would, and say, how does this speak to me? And is it valid enough that I want to incorporate this into the work that I do? Or does it seem like it's too outside the realm of what it is that I'm looking for information to help guide me?
Excellent. And I think a great example of this would be well, breathing itself, breath work, it's, that's a great example. Also, scar tissue. I think scar tissue can have a profound effect on on so many levels for for the body, for movement. And I don't mean just limiting range of motion. I don't mean just capturing tissue in the surrounding area, but the electrical system within the body, just the mental emotional state. I mean, there's so many different levels that you could look at one thing, and it's almost like that parable of three blind men, each touching different versions of an elephant, right? One touches the tail, another touches the foot, and the other one touches the trunk, and they all have these different ideas. It's really hard to wrap around when it comes to breathing, scar tissue, and so on. But before I pull up scar tissue any further, how about we talk about breathing instead? Because that's a big, well, you say you have them take home something regarding breath work, whether it's the pro teams or, for that matter, the individuals that you see. So tell me about breathing.
Um, well, it's kind of important, you know.
Is it? Yeah,
It's got some life-saving measures to it, which is awesome.
that's cool. All right.
The brain will always prioritize breathing. And I know that sounds like common sense, but by that I mean it's going to constantly position, orient, arrange itself in such a way that breathing is easy, comfortable, and familiar. People don't want to have to think about it. They want it to just kind of happen, and they kind of want to have it feel sort of like the same breath they had just before and the next one after, because then it's not a distraction to them. What that does, because of the way that our body is made, which is a mess inside there, right? It's the word I use is it's hydrobiodynamics is the way that our system functions. We are a water-based structure. We're built upon pressures. And to your point, it's vibrations and electrical signaling happening all over the place. It's pressures inside valves and tubes and tubes and tubes and tubes, which includes muscles and tissues. And so those structures will then morph and change, and they'll assume a position if the body's constantly trying to orient itself in such a way that it's trying to make breathing easier. Therefore, ribs start to shift and turn a little bit. Pelvises change their shape and orientation, may flare or turn or rotate. Craniums will distort a little bit, and cranial bones will shift a little bit. Heads will move forward because the neck begins to say, I've got to kind of move you forward to open up your airway to be able to get air in, and so on and so on. And then therefore, the connective tissue, this will segue nice into scar tissue. The connective tissue, our fascial structures and all those other network of incredibly dynamic and viable and energy storing communication system that it is, begins to change itself and then hold the body hostage, are the words that I tell people, in certain positions and orientations. Well, now you've got firing mechanisms of muscles and tendons that's going to change as a result of that, because now it's being held in a position. And so now it's not always necessarily a weakness or bad mechanics. It's like, no, the structure actually can't get there because of the position it's being held in. And then therefore the muscles have been firing a certain way as a result of that. And then they'll change their orientation as a result. So when you begin to then put people in positions and give them mechanisms that create the ability to kind of ground itself, to kind of push, to load, to compress structures, put it into a turn or a rotation of some kind to redirect that airflow, and then coach them on breathing, typically in and out of the nose for repositioning or reorienting based breathing activities, to allow for that cranial expansion and that thoracic expansion to happen in a balanced way. That allows things enough time to shift to this change of direction. The nervous system and the signaling process of kind of like, oh, that's kind of new, I'm not used to that. They pay attention to their breath because I've coached them, but it will feel different to their body because different things are moving differently as a result of that. And then when they do that through a number of repetitions, their system's like, yeah, I can kind of move into that direction now, because you've allowed it the opportunity to be able to do that.
Wonderfully said. Yeah, that's great. So providing um, additional resources is the way that I will often think about it. Like something that has been restricted, and whether it is because of the efficiency of breathing, seeking out the most efficient means of breathing, whether it was from like it comes from both directions. An experience in life, an accident, a trauma, mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, whatever it is going to set up the body to be in a certain place, which then the brain is now figuring out what's the most efficient means of breathing through this. And then that's going to be this back and forth kind of negotiation between experiences on the outside working their way in. It's kind of like when people say, oh, you work from the bottom up. I'm like, no, we can work from the top down. We can work from the inside out. We can work from the outside in. We just need a starting point. And it can vary from one person to the next, one event to the next. But all we're looking to do is, can we provide the body with as many resources as possible? Because all their life, the resources are being slowly stripped away because of the world in which we live in, where most people live in wheelchairs, the trauma they sustain, and the way that the brain is trying to to keep its priorities in check. How's that?
Correct. Correct. No, that's spot on. So a phrase a couple of colleagues of mine say all the time is breathing is walking and walking is breathing. So, we are a system that is always moving, period. And I think
Yes.
people forget that. If you try to kind of hold your eyes and stare at something and you think your eyes aren't moving, your eyes are moving. When you're sleeping, even when you're, frozen in REM sleep, it's called REM for a reason. Digestion's constantly occurring. Your cerebral spinal fluid's constantly moving. We are a constantly mobile, moving structure that we have created an environment in many cases that's doing everything but allowing that to happen. And so when that begins to affect the way that our body can then arrange and orient itself because of those limitations, then again, as we talked about, compensations will begin to occur. And it's going to prioritize, how do I get myself to a place to open up my airway? Like I'm pointing at my throat and my mouth just as much as I'm talking about the way that the lungs fill and the way that all of our diaphragms, cranial, neck, thoracic, pelvic, all of them can create pumping mechanisms. One of the I'm actually doing a lecture on this in another night or two, is one of the messages that I think is one that kind of overrides people sometimes is gravity, for example. Like this poor messaging and the bad rap that gravity gets, that it's this force that's constantly pulling on us, that it's this thing we have to kind of fight, and all these images that create this negativity to it, when it's like, we wouldn't be here. Like it's how we evolved as a species. And if people can get their head around, it's less of this downward pull and more of this, I'll go Einsteinian here, this acceleration of movement that's encouraging the body to move, then I think that becomes a little bit easier to get our head around. Let's not work on stiffening and ergonomics and trying to arrange ourselves to combat its influence. Let's figure out ways to make our bodies more dynamic. How do we make that happen if we have to sit all day at a desk? How do we create the opportunities to allow the system to appreciate that, forward, backward movement is what the system craves and needs for things to stay lubricated, to prevent, I'll go back to your word, scar tissue, which I think is overused. So we can come back to that in a minute.
Ooh, please.
So, I think I kind of went off a little bit of a tangent there, but the mechanisms that we've put into place societally, I don't think with ill will, obviously, but are ramping up our systems in such a way that we're constantly on. Our systems are constantly overstimulated. We're in this sympathetic drive kind of all the time. Everything is always flashing. Attention spans have gone from, a minute to 7 seconds over the last 3 decades or something like that. I mean, it's evolving and not necessarily in a really favorable way. And so what things can we think about and introduce that allow people to be present in the activities that go with people? It's kind of hard to be distracted. You know what I mean? Because you have to pay attention and sense and feel and be in positions that your body's not at all used to. Or you and your work and people who are listening to this and your ability to be with them, regularly and engage with them to keep them present for their workout so that they get that best outcome possible, and so on and so on.
Beautiful. Okay, I want to know what word or what term that you have taken to mean what we might call scar tissue. Are you saying adhesions? What kind of term do you use when we're talking the healing over?
Yeah, I did that just for the aha effect by pulling scar tissue
I got
plugs.
you.
I use the word with people, obviously, depending upon who they are. I'll say adhesions, I'll say scar tissue, based upon what I think that they'll capture. What I wanted to say by that is that obviously a scar is a scar, and obviously trauma is trauma. And so certainly, having seen dissections and numerous times and seen many pictures it relates to, let's say scar tissue of tissue, my issue comes with it's automatically defaulted to in today's world as, oh, that's the problem you have. So A, you're stuck with it. Sorry, good luck. And or B, we have to break up the scar tissue. And so we do that via it is that the practitioner or the professional says needs to be done. And I've seen joints that are like infested with what they call arthrofibrosis, like scar tissue to the nth degree. So I'm not denying its presence. I'm talking about the overabundance of a message that people get as a result of people that they've seen, that you've got this thing and this is going to limit you moving forward until we, quote unquote, either break it up or you've got to live with it. Because of the water nature of all of our structures, all of it. When we're born, we're 100% water. We came out of fluid, right? That's 100% fluid. That's why babies are flopping around all over the place. And then every subsequent decade, that percentage kind of goes down a little bit. So now we're, if you look at the numbers, 65-ish% water. On the molecular level, most of us is fluid. I mean, even bones are bendy inside a living organism. Not the models we're used to seeing for teaching purposes, but in a living organism, they bend. They have some pliability to it, along with all the other tissues. When we have the capacity to understand ways to move, I'll use the word fluidly, and change the dynamics and the ability to move through varying layers of tissue to allow the slide and the glide to occur for that restoration of movement capability, that's what works through, let's just call it scar tissue, in the tissue-related world. And that's what allows that nutrients and that re-energy to be able to be introduced to that area to allow it to then mobilize and move, and I'll even say heal, if you would, so that it becomes a much more natural part of the region that it had become disrupted from. And so now it becomes more fluid nature by the way that it interacts with all the other structures around it. When you work on improving pressure management via breath control, coupled with, which changes pressures of all the tissue, coupled with movement-based activities, that's what allows that mechanism to happen in as fluidly and as fluid a way as possible. I threw the fluid in there a lot, but it just for emphasis.
No, that's great. It is. So, do you take this insight, this information, to the teams that you've worked with? Like, I'm thinking Bruins, Hawks, Coyotes, and so on. Like, is it something that they're interested in regards to your work, or do they just say, Michael, we really want you to just come in and talk to us about breath work? I mean, what's the draw?
Yeah. I work with teams and organizations that are interested in learning a different message. And some of the message is, part of it is we talked about, breath, and I keep saying breath is what people automatically think of from a breathing perspective, but it runs the show in terms of the way that the body works. But I want people to understand these dynamics more. I want them to understand the morphing, manipulative dynamic of the human body and how powerfully we can influence it more than just what we learned in school and what a lot of more linear, hierarchically minded approach things with. And that, when you can get your head around, fluid dynamics better and understand the interrelationships between the different layers of tissue, and that a muscle contraction isn't just muscle filaments, it's tubes compressing fluid. That's what you're filling with hypertrophy, and that's what's creating the contraction. Our ability to optimize our intra-abdominal, intrathoracic pressure for lifting heavy stuff. What does that mean to people? Oh, it's, Valsalva, or not quite Valsalva, but you got to optimize. Well, what does it mean? Well, if we look at things just from a standpoint of muscles and tendons and not manipulating that pressure, they would explode with the weight and the volume that we place on them. It's our ability to really manage that mechanism that allows us to be able to squeeze those structures in a stable way to then exert load and force onto them. And those teams, for example, that you mentioned, they're forward-thinking professionals that work with them. And so I've developed relationships over the years, and they're like, I want to learn about this stuff, so come on in. And sometimes it'll just be me educating the performance staff and the rehab staff, or sometimes it's actually me working with individual players, or sometimes it's actually me being in a team workout and kind of seeing the way that they're doing stuff, and then kind of offering suggestions and ideas as to the way that they might be more successful with doing that, just based upon some of the more simple concepts of what I just kind of talked about.
Brilliant. Now, earlier you mentioned stiffness, and so I want to spend a moment talking about this and getting your insight, because primarily strength conditioning in that world came from the weight room of heavy lifting, and with that came the fact that you wanted to be stiff, stable, rigid to produce force and lift heavy things. And yet, so that's all well and good, and we need stiffness, and that's being promoted quite heavily these days. But we also need dynamic, well, pressure, right, in terms of the tubes in which you're relaying to relating to. Is that, like, if the spine was one solid bone like my femur, then I would want it to remain pretty much in one position all the time. However, it's a collection of many, many bones, and therefore the space in between is meant to move. So at one moment, we'll need that static upright stiffness that we are really reinforcing over and over again. But equally so, the other side of the page in the book is, I want to be dynamically capable and not necessarily stiff, but pressurized, shall we say? I don't know.
Well done. Nice finish
Yeah.
there.
Okay.
Balanced pressurization, if you would, or whatever you want to call it. No, you're spot on. It goes back. There's that art again too, right? And there's that that's the baby bear that everybody wants. I want enough Papa Bear to lift heavy stuff. I want enough Mama Bear to be able to sleep well at night and feel like I'm able to get good recovered sleep. And I want Baby Bear to be able to walk through my daytime. And that is part of what, let's just say, the clients that I work with for a long period of time can get to. Some of them, they're not as much about loading. Some of them a little bit more about kind of like ongoing management and just body weight based stuff. Other people, it's about, I want you being able to get back to doing your heavier workouts and your CrossFit. Like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, it's whatever it is. I want you to be loaded, but I also want you to understand this ability to wax and wane in and out of it based upon the task at hand. And so people like us who've been doing this for quite a while, the more clients spend with us, the more education and understanding they get with what we're trying to accomplish. And we're more and more successful with them being able to have that whole spectrum of understanding of the way that the body works. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. And a lot of people kind of come and go throughout, our time with them, or they get the bits and pieces they need, and then they're doing their program on their own after you've kind of coached them into a good program, or their back feels better with me. And so, they're kind of out the door. And which brings me to kind of some of the message at times that I'll say with people is, I want to have you get to the point that you feel better, but I really want to kind of bring you past that. Like, I want you to learn more and be able to be better, so that you can understand how this amazing mechanism and organism that you've been blessed with works, and the way that you can really use it to the nth degree. So stiffness to me, going back to, I think, which was your original question, is about the
Hmm.
ability of managing all those things. It's capturing the incompressible nature of the fluids inside us. It's optimizing the pressurization piece that you talked about. It allows the muscle, tendon, connective tissue dynamic to then squeeze this structure and be able to then say, I got it. Now go do what it is you need to do. And obviously, depending upon the task, warrants how stiff we need it to be. If I'm doing back squatting with a barbell, that's going to be different than if I'm doing on a kettlebell swing. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
If I'm doing a bench press on a bench bilaterally with a barbell, that's going to be different than doing alternating chest press. So it's that balance of stiffness that we need depending upon how heavy and fixed the task is, versus I still want that stiffness, but we're going a little more dynamic now because, sorry, that's life. And so how do we kind of then introduce those mechanisms to be able to get you to that sweet spot?
Well said.
Answer, but I covered.
No, it's great. I mean, we're so inclined, I think, just by human nature, to find something shiny and flashy and focus on it. And well, it's that reflexive saccade, right? It's the
Yeah.
when we're in a library studying, and suddenly a bird flies past the window. Our primitive instinct is to understand what that flash was, because either it's going to be dinner or it wants me for dinner. You know, that whole survival aspect of it. And so, but we don't notice the dust that's on the bookshelf itself because it's not moving. It's not so much, it's not drawing our attention. So anytime we have something that's flashing and moving and new to our concepts, that's great. We're drawn to it, which is wonderful to learn. But we also have to understand there's an entire room surrounding that that may not be attracting our attention, but we may want to look for it nonetheless because it's there. So
Yep.
let's talk about perform better. You've got
Hold
you're
that
going
thought
to
a
be on
second.
the
Can I say one thing
yeah.
about what you just
Oh,
said?
please,
It's
please.
the word, it's words that I'll use with my clients, is that we need to do better at embracing the mundane. What seems like, too run of the mill, too day, like we are becoming so disconnected from the organic aspect of how we actually got here and evolved and actually work best, that we're sadly overlooking for things to continue that are flashy and birds that are flying. And what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And it's contributing to a lot of issues with how we're working, not just on the macro scale, but on the really micro scale. I mean, nervous systems are changing and they're being disrupted, and immune systems are being compromised because people aren't getting back to the things that got us here and allow us to be more successful because of that overstimulation and that overdrive for that next big thing. So I'm not bashing society. I know it sounds like I've said that a couple of times. I want people to kind of rethink sometimes that, going out for a walk in the woods or, on the beach somewhere and being present is the most powerful thing, is one of the most powerful things you can do. Sitting down at the dinner table with your family and interacting and engaging is some of the most powerful things you can do. Like all these things versus, oh, I got to go here and I've got to do this. And, oh, can I listen to a podcast at the same time? You know what I mean? We have to kind of
Yes.
like get back to our senses and embrace them. I'm not against those things, but stop making them everything and bring us back to some of the stuff that allows us to be able to kind of allow our systems to heal and recover. So thank you for letting me.
Yes. Ah, that's great. Okay, so with time remaining here, I'd love to touch upon the fact that you're going to be in Long Beach, California, in the middle of July at the Perform Better Training Summit. I know the listening audience for the last several weeks now, we've had every other week or so one of the presenters like Michael on. So by now, you must know about Perform Better. If you're just listening for the first time, check out performbetter.com because it's incredible information that runs the gamut between rehab to return to performance and everything in between. But what will you be speaking on? Do you recall what you titled your topic? Because I don't.
I do, because I pulled it up before our podcast today. Thank you very much. I'm just kidding.
Good man.
It's called Gait Grounding in Human Performance. And so one of the I alluded before that, a lot of what we don't think about brings things back to gait. We're constantly ambulating, even if we're sitting at a desk, which sounds odd, but the system in the brain needs for it to be able to be constantly pumping side to side. And we work best when our systems are, I'm kind of doing my little dance here for those that can see it, is a system that has the capacity to be able to compress and load one side and then go and compress and load the other side without too much compensation along the way, without areas down in the lower body, the mid to upper body, or the head or the neck create some compensation that's not allowing that full compressive loading to happen from one side to the other side. And so how that relates to our ability to perceive and sense load going down and load coming back up, and some activities people can engage in to be able to create that sense and appreciate that both sides aren't going to feel the same when they go to do this. And one side might feel different than the other for most everybody. It might be a different side from one person to the next person. It all has to do with what we talked about before, where their compensations are, and how we can then bring that up to the high level of human performance, which means, again, going for walks with the dog or your children, or highest level of performance because you're the highest level of athlete. But how that disconnect of our human system from that grounding sense and capability is kind of ramping up and increasing with, again, more and more societal things that we've put into place and messages that are out there that have kind of distracted us from that mechanism.
Yeah. I mean, with gait, as it has been taught to me over and over again, if you think of any joint motion, you can find it somewhere in the gait cycle. It exists, right?
Right.
So, and there's a beautiful symphony or orchestration of movement amongst one articulation and another, and there's patterns that emerge within that. So it's almost, for me, that's what we base our programming on, is resting posture and gait mechanics, because they're the true absolutes in a way, that if we can compare and find out what's missing in those two environments, then we are being given the information right then and there as to what a person needs within their programming, whether it's soft tissue targets or mobility drills or even breath work or strength. So wonderful. And then aside from that, give me some other ideas as to how people can follow you. You say you're going to be speaking in a couple of nights. Of course, by the time this airs, that'll be said and done. But how about the calendar for 2025? Where else will you be traveling? Do you know yet?
Yeah, where am I going? Doing some personal trips, which I'm really excited about. There's some coursework that I'm taking that is involved kind of like vision and body position and movement, as well as dental, like occlusal influences of kind of the temporomandibular joint and our teeth contacts and our head and our neck, and how that influences body position down below.
Yeah.
I've kind of taken a little break from some of the social media pages that I have. I do have a very full kind of at MJMATC is kind of like the handle that I have for my Instagram and other things that I have. There's a lot of information on there for people to kind of go through that I think they probably would find helpful if they haven't seen my stuff in the past. I've taken a little break just for a number of different reasons, which is, I've just taken a little break.
So you can walk on the beach or through the forest, is what you're saying.
Exactly right. Yeah, I'm trying to bring things back to myself for a little bit, as well as hopefully other people as well. But I do still writing. I'm starting to write a little bit more on Substack, because I find that kind of like an interesting way that I can get a little bit more lengthy information out there and things like that. I'm part of some organizations, so I'm doing some more local lectures currently. That's what I got going on. Oh, I'm easy to
Dude,
find
that
online, so people feel free to email me if they've got questions or want any other input. My web page actually has a lot of information as well too, which is also mjmatc.com.
And for myself, growing up as a New Englander, I know that the end of September, first couple of weeks of October would be the most ideal time of year to come visit you just outside of Portland there. So that may be happening. You never know. Yeah.
Pretty special time.
Michael, this has been great. I can't thank you enough.
Rocky, appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Cheers.
And that's one for the books right there. Michael, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Can't wait for our paths to cross again, probably in Providence in August at the Perform Better Training Summit. In the meantime, you can check out my website again if you haven't been there already. Got blogs and podcasts and a whole bunch more, including the brand new wedge kits. Got a little poster in there on how you can use these wedges from rehab to return to performance in the weight room as well as in the rehab setting. And remember, Perform Better 3-day functional summit. Just go to performbetter.com. You'll get a whole bunch of information and great products there. NSCA National Conference, July 16th to the 19th. Be there, be square. Check out Satanta College one more time. And hey, do yourself a favor. Grab a copy of my book. It's called Return to Center, Strength Training to Realign the Body, Recover from Pain, and Achieve Optimal Performance. We'll see you next week.